and I would like to return the thank you to all of you for providing such wonderful intellectual stimulation throughout the week. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah. I'm going to turn you up a little if that's
okay. That's great. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And this is the most exciting research that I've ever done. So I'm excited to share it with you. It's the first time. So it's a birth process, and we all know that's a little messy sometimes. So how the analysis of light led to a new worldview. Can you turn it down just a touch?
Yes.
The history of quantum mechanics and the Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto cycles and archetypal field theory hypothesis. We'll start with this quote from Heinz Pagel. He wrote a book called The Cosmic Code. It's kind of a layman's introduction to to quantum mechanics. And he says the notion that reality is a set of fields that give probability for finding their associated quanta is the most important consequence of the relativistic quantum field theory. It is the central concept for the picture of reality. Not only did the idea of matter disappear into the field concept, but the field specified the probability for finding the quanta. So we can kind of understand matter more as fields of energy rather than solid objects, because inside the atom there are probability waves of quarks and interactions that we are inferring probability. And I'm going to just unpack Jupiter, Uranus, and Pluto really quick as it relates to the history of quantum mechanics, not the full depth of their archetypal meaning. Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system and corresponds to the principle of expansion. It magnifies and elevates and makes more visible, thank you, the other planetary archetypes it's in alignment with. It relates to the principle of good fortune, advancement, and success. Uranus is the first planet discovered with a telescope, relates to the principle of change, revolution, and novelty, to electricity, to technological invention and innovation, and experiment, lightning-like flashes of insight, revelation, to speed and acceleration, to new beginnings and breakthroughs, to the Promethean fire of light, to creativity and originality, and to genius. It also corresponds to sudden, unexpected surprises, to radical disruption and uncertainty, to the unpredictable, and to breakups of previously established authoritative structures or worldviews. Pluto was discovered in 1930 between World War I and World War II and corresponds to the principle of primordial power and intensity, to the underlying instinctual forces of nature, to the hidden realities beneath the surface of phenomena or matter, to transformation, both destructive and regenerative. Pluto also relates to the massive elemental power of the atomic nucleus. So what this is a time wave created by Kai Latimer in this image, it's the Uranus-Pluto cycle over the 20th century. And let's see, I'm going to start actually, if you look at if we had it a little bit larger, there would be one here in the 1840s through the 1850s, which Sigmund Freud is born under. And then in this alignment, Einstein and Carl Jung are born. And then this is the turn of the century Uranus-Pluto alignment that corresponds to the emergence of depth psychology, quantum mechanics, the theory of special relativity. And there seems to be a deep overlap to these phenomena emerging at the same time. They're both rendering a reality that was unknown before, the unconscious of the psyche and the unknown dimension of matter. And this is the alignment of the trine, actually, of the 1920s, kind of the roaring 20s, and it also corresponds to the development of the theories and experiments that and the mathematical equations that eventually proved quantum mechanics in 1927 at the Solvay Congress under a Jupiter-Uranus alignment. And then what happens in the 30s,
Brian, sorry. And
That's okay.
Opening, Hubble's opening up the cosmos. And the
Oh, gotcha. Edwin Hubble, gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, it's okay. Like, there's obviously lots of other correlations that go along with this, cultural manifestations, but I'm focusing on quantum mechanics and the overlap.
I just wanted to Brian.
That's okay. And just the overlap between the development of depth psychology and quantum mechanics, and I believe there's a strong interplay and a need to understand how both come together. So in the 30s, the Uranus-Pluto alignment corresponded to the first, like the splitting of the atom, the recognition of the power inside of the nucleus. This is also when Stan Grof is born. And then in the 60s, what takes place is the standard model of particle physics is developed, and it's a model of particles, and they predict in the 60s to find the Higgs boson, which would be the final boson that would complete the full model of the standard model. So this is all developed in the 60s at the same time that Stan Grof is developing the perinatal, or recognizing the depth of the importance of the perinatal experience and transpersonal psychology. And then we have this gap in between the 60s and our current period, which is ultimately where we built the Large Hadron Collider and found the Higgs boson that was predicted in the 60s. So that's the kind of overarching outline of what I'm going to present here. And then I'm going to show a lot of the, real quickly, the correlations between the founders of quantum mechanics and their charts and these wave patterns. So real quickly, what I'm recognizing here is these are probability waves of potential archetypal manifestation. Like the probability is more dense that you will find archetypal phenomena related to Uranus and Pluto during these alignments. And then the other aspect that we'll try to point to is that it's not just the fields that are in the collective, it's the individuals that are doing the work bringing their archetypal field from their birth chart in participation with the archetypal fields, the waves of probability over time. So what's interesting is these are the 10 scientists that are listed on the Wikipedia page as the fathers of quantum mechanics. And it turns out that all 10 of these scientists have Jupiter-Uranus or Uranus-Pluto strongly in their natal chart. Not a single one of them doesn't have it, and several of them have both. So just to begin, Isaac Newton, James Maxwell, Albert Einstein are considered the three most important scientists of the modern era. And if we look at their charts, Isaac Newton has Uranus, trine Jupiter, both in a sextile to the sun within 1 degree. Maxwell has the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Einstein has Jupiter opposite Uranus in a T-square with Pluto. Michael Faraday, who is considered the most important experimental scientist prior to Maxwell, he's actually, he developed magnetic, or maybe I'm jumping ahead. Yeah, sorry, I'll do this quickly. He's born with Uranus opposite Pluto. Max Planck, the founder of quantum mechanics, born with Jupiter and Uranus with Mercury. Wolfgang Pauli was one of the best theoretical physicists, and we'll go into him later because he ends up having a 30-year correspondence with Carl Jung about the nature of synchronicities and his dreams and the correlations between quantum mechanics and psychology. And in their correspondences, they were striving to find a neutral language that would inform both physics and psychology. And yeah, we'll get into more him later. So Louis de Broglie, born with Jupiter opposite Uranus, he develops the wave theory, or one of the wave theories. Paul Dirac, Pluto opposite Uranus. Max Born, Uranus squared Jupiter in a T-square with the sun. Niels Bohr, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction with the moon. Schrödinger, another wave theory developer. This is the widest orb I have for any of the alignments. It's 20 degrees. It's a little outside of the natal orb, but I threw it in there. And we'll see something important when he develops wave theory.
But he does have the type trine. Go back.
Oh, oops. Oh, that's right. Exactly. Thank you.
Uranus is very
Yeah,
tight.
totally. Yeah. So Pluto trine Uranus, 5 degrees.
He's
in there.
fits your paradigm.
Yeah. And it's the same with Richard Feynman. Thanks, Rick. Werner Heisenberg, Sun Uranus opposite Pluto. Richard Feynman, he has Uranus trine Pluto as well, and Sun square Uranus. So Enrico Fermi, he's not on the list that we saw, but he's considered the architect of the atomic bomb. Uranus opposite Pluto. Ernest Rutherford, also considered the father of nuclear physics, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Ernest Lawrence developed the cyclotron, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, Pluto opposite Uranus. John Stuart Bell developed non-locality, Uranus square Pluto with the Sun and Mercury. Okay, so in the beginning, Christian Huygens in 1678 proposed that light was a wave. And this happened during a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction of 1678. But it's interesting, I didn't mention Christian Huygens as a Jupiter-Uranus figure, but what does he have? He has Neptune opposite Mercury and the Sun square Jupiter. Jupiter T squared Neptune. And so what is the wave? Neptune. Neptune is the wave. So then Newton develops a corpuscular theory of light, which actually means particle. He took light and split it through a prism and recognized the color diffraction. And in doing so, he felt as though each of the colors were particular particles that were producing those colors. And let's see. It was also noticed at this time in 1705, there was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Jupiter moved into the Uranus. This is the beginning of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the early 1700s as well. But a year later, it was noticed that vacuums or sparks fly farther in vacuums. It was like one of the first recognitions of that, and that becomes really important for later research in physics. So this is interesting. It's Thomas Young. He does a double slit experiment, and he had Uranus opposite Jupiter as a transit and transiting Jupiter square natal Uranus. So he had double Jupiter-Uranus when he did this experiment. And now that I have a short video that's going to explain the double slit experiment.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange netherworld of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
So let that sink in a little bit. And I'm going to go through more evidence. I'm going to try and do it really quick. This is when Faraday developed electromagnetic induction. And this is actually within a year, 9 months or so of Maxwell's birth. So he's born with the same Jupiter-Uranus alignment that Faraday discovered electromagnetism in its raw form. And then Maxwell takes Faraday's experiments and creates theory of electromagnetism, which I think they actually call the Faraday-Maxwell equations, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, so at that point, there's Jupiter-Uranus opposition when he writes that as well. Heinrich Hertz discovers the photoelectric effect, which I'll just point it out real quick. Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, Uranus opposite is natal Jupiter. The Michelson-Morley Experiment is the most famous failed experiment in history. Prior to this, there was a conception of ether that was actually slowing down the planet, or like it was a resistance that we thought was in space. This experiment proved that it didn't exist, and it's the combination of this experiment and the photoelectric effect that led Einstein to his theory of special relativity, if I'm not mistaken. And this is just anecdotal. J.J. Thomson discovered the electron, Uranus opposite Uranus. Max Planck founds quantum mechanics. This is really important. Jupiter-Uranus conjunction opposite a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the sky at his Uranus opposition. And the reason this happened was because he was studying black body radiation. So what's happening here is these are frequencies, wavelength frequencies. And here, this is visible light. And it only happens between, or actually I'm not sure, but the classical theory predicted that it would keep going up. But what happens is that the temperature goes up, and this is what you can see at 5,000 degrees Kelvin, and then the temperature drops back down into the ultraviolet spectrum. So this is ultraviolet, this is infrared, and this is what's visible light. So he was trying to understand, why did this curve go back down? And so what he proposed was the Planck's constant, which is the smallest measurement that measurements are made by, from what I can gather. And it's this number, which is joule second, which is something about energy passing through at a certain time action. Okay. And so Richard Feynman says no one understands quantum mechanics, so I'm safe that I don't fully grok this. But at the same time, this equation is used in the heart of most all quantum mechanical theories, from what I understand. And what's fascinating is it moved us to recognizing that there is a smallest unit. But it ends up, Einstein uses Planck's constant to develop the theory of special relativity, which he had Uranus trine Uranus at the time. And Rutherford discovers a nucleus, Uranus opposition to his Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Niels Bohr discovers a model of the atom. It's been superseded, but it still works for understanding spectroscopy, which I believe is where we get our most accurate measurements, is in spectral analysis of light and of stars. He had Uranus trine his Uranus-Mercury alignment at the time. And I'm not going to try and explain that. Louis de Broglie developed the electron wave theory, and this happens, he's born with the Jupiter-Uranus alignment, but you can see when he developed the theory, Neptune was conjoining his sun in Leo. And then Schrödinger is the other person who developed the wave, and you look at that, he had Neptune crossing his sun at the same time that he's developing wave theory. Max Born, statistical analysis of the wave equation. He wins the Nobel Prize for it at his Uranus opposition. He proves that the wave theory is correct. Heisenberg develops matrix mechanics at the same time, roughly, which is at his Uranus square. It moves back to like 21, still within the 5-degree square of his natal Uranus. And then the uncertainty principle is developed with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It was 1927 at the Solvay Congress, which this is where quantum mechanics is solidified as a legitimate science. And I also just want to mention here that Carl Jung was developing his theory of synchronicity parallel at the same time in the late 20s. He first mentions it in 1928 and then coins the term a couple of years later. So it's just an interesting parallel of those things. And then back to more evidence, I'll be really quick. This guy invents the betatron. Now let's skip it. Ernest Lawrence, the cyclotron, Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto T-square. This is actually when he patented it in 1934. This leads to all particle accelerator physics. The cyclotron is using electromagnetism from Maxwell and Faraday to move particles near the speed of light to ultimately collide them to create the colliders to research deeper and deeper particle physics.
Chad,
yes.
It's also where Pluto was first, plutonium was first synthesized out of that cyclotron.
Oh, great, thank you. So yeah, and this is the transits for it, I guess, forget. Jupiter opposite Uranus, he square on his Mercury, whatever. Anyway, this is the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, which Einstein had a problem with the uncertainty of quantum mechanics. So he developed this paradox to try and say that there were local hidden variables that would account for the uncertainty in quantum mechanics. And it ends up not being correct. And this is the first self-sustaining nuclear reaction. Enrico Fermi does it in Chicago, December 2nd, 1942. And there's a Uranus, he has Uranus opposite Uranus, but it's interesting, it's a Uranus-Saturn conjunction because it's the first controlled atomic physics, atomic fission, so they're actually able to control it, and this is what leads to nuclear reactors and being able to figure out how to make the atomic bomb.
Controlling and sustaining.
Yeah, controlling and sustaining, yeah, thank you. Which is very Saturn in principle. Okay, now we're going to branch just a little bit because Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli had a 30-year correspondence, and it turns out that Wolfgang Pauli was responsible in many ways for encouraging Carl Jung to write synchronicity because of the correlations they were seeing in quantum mechanics that supported his understanding of synchronicity in psychology. And so this is from correspondence. Pauli revealed his initial interest in synchronicity in a letter to Jung, November 7th, 1948. Jupiter-Uranus opposition, by the way. Our talk yesterday over the synchronicity of dreams and outer experience was a great deal of help to me. Jung replied 6 months later, said, "For a long time, you have urged me at some point to put my thoughts down on synchronicity. I have finally succeeded in following your suggestion." And he actually sent him the early monograph at that point for review. He really was impressed by Pauli's ability to analyze his writing. And this is Jung on synchronicity in a letter to Wolfgang. One thing, this says this is the first, and it's in the first mention of it in the letters, but I'm guessing that they talked about it in private because this is so late. They had a longer. It just seems because this statement doesn't make sense. For a long time, you've urged me, and this is just 6 months later. So, just because it was mentioned in the notes, they were talking about it prior to this. But Jung to Pauli, synchronicity is, alongside numbers, a further point of contact between physics and psychology. In this case, the meaning of what they have in common seems to be relatively simultaneous events. It also looks as though there is frequently, or maybe regularly, an archetypal prerequisite for the meaningful parallelism. Now, this is Lindorf. He wrote a book on the letters between them, analyzing the letters between Jung and Pauli. And this first statement is from Pauli. In a non-psychic acausality, the statistical result as such is reproducible. Thus, one speaks of probability law instead of an ordering factor, archetype. The archetype in quantum physics becomes a mathematical probability concept. In spite of the logical distinctions separating these two acausal phenomena, intuition favors complete structures. And then this is David Lindorf at the bottom. Since the archetypal field is intrinsically bound up with a synchronicity, broadening the concept of synchronicity to include phenomena observed in atomic physics would necessitate associating the archetype with probability. Pauli expressed hope that this would take place. The idea met with Jung's approval. Now, this is just someone analyzing their letters. It's secondhand in that sense, but okay, so this is really fascinating. Wolfgang Pauli is known to be associated with the Pauli Effect, which he was a theoretical physicist, not a practicing laboratory physicist. But it turns out that, we'll just read it. In his book, 30 Years That Shook Physics, The Story of Quantum Theory, George Genau writes that about Wolfgang Pauli, who is apparently considered a person particularly associated with synchronicity events. It is referred to as the Pauli Effect, a mysterious phenomenon which is not understood on purely materialistic basis and probably never will be. Maybe not. It is well known that theoretical physicists cannot handle experimental equipment. It breaks wherever they touch it. Pauli was such a good theoretical physicist that sometimes something usually broke in the lab whenever he merely stepped across the threshold. A mysterious event that did not seem to be first connected with Pauli's presence once occurred in Professor J. Frank's laboratory in Gottingen. Early one afternoon, without apparent cause, a complicated apparatus for the study of atomic phenomena collapsed. Frank wrote humorously about this to Pauli, had his Zurich address. After some delay, received an answer to an envelope with a Danish stamp. Pauli wrote that he had gone to visit Bohr, and at that time of the mishap in Frank's laboratory, his train had stopped for a few minutes in Gottingen railroad station. You may believe this anecdote or not, but there are many other observations, the reality of the Pauli effect, and that's true. There's lots of people who recognize that and were very concerned about it. Actually, Pauli, from what I understand, he potentially would actually have images of that happening, and then when it would take place, he would feel relief. So he actually is carrying it. And see, this is where, like, with the archetypal fields, I feel like we're carrying a birth that we're participating in. Wolfgang Pauli is the physicist that I listed that's most closely born to the founding of quantum mechanics. Just 8 months prior to it, he's born with the exact Jupiter-Uranus opposite Pluto, but it's in a T-square with the moon. The moon is the relational field. When he goes into places, when he's nearby in relationship, his Uranus-Pluto field, Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto field, is present and enacting and seems to be causing problems. You also see he has somatic, yeah, exactly, somatic. And it's also, I think, this, because he has Mercury tight square to Saturn and Sun exact square to Saturn. He's also considered the conscience of physics. And he was very sharp-tongued and very critical of physicists when they were wrong and stuff. But he kind of, I think he carried a certain, they referred to it as a monotheistic intensity about himself. Just, you know, sense of power. So, in 1964, John Bell, using, I think, wave theory and the EPR experiment from Einstein, proves the non-locality, the theorem of non-locality, which is entanglement, ultimately. Yeah, Uranus-Pluto conjunction. I forget, but I'm going over time. So, but this is what the theory says. If a hidden variable theory is local, it will not agree with quantum mechanics. If it agrees with quantum mechanics, it will not be local. This is what the theorem says. And what he means by hidden variables, he means mechanistic causality, like in a Newtonian sense. And so, like I said before, this is when the standard model of physics is developed. And it's the Jupiter-Uranus, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, but it's opposite Saturn. That's the model. It's the structure of particle physics. This is the Stanford Linear Accelerator, founded in 1962. Uranus-Pluto opposite Jupiter. This corresponds with the space race and that type of thing. And then just in 68, 69, just as Jupiter's coming into the conjunction with Uranus and Pluto, they first infer that quarks are there, present. So it gives them interest to keep exploring and understanding the model of particle physics. But this is also when the first internet transmission is relayed, so it becomes important later. Okay, super proton synchrotron. This is a first particle accelerator built at CERN, and it was built or started work in May of 1976. This is also the Jupiter-Uranus alignment that Rick and Stan began to study archetypal astrology and connect it to the perinatal birth process. Is that relatively correct? And that proton synchrotron discovered the W and Z bosons with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 1983. And after that is called the Large Electron Positron Collider. It's built in 1989 in the same place that the Large Hadron Collider is today. It's exactly the same circle, but they built it with less power. And it's interesting, it's a Jupiter-Uranus opposition that also corresponds to the invention of the World Wide Web, which was invented, the same Jupiter-Uranus opposition, but by a person who is born with a Jupiter-Uranus, he's a physicist at CERN, and he develops the World Wide Web, actually, in order for the physicists at CERN to share their information because it was becoming too cumbersome to mail. They couldn't mail it to each other anymore, it's too much. So he invents the World Wide Web in order for them to share their information. So, then the Large Hadron Collider is built and runs its first operation September 10th, 2008. Uranus-Pluto is beginning its square. The Sun is in there as well. It seems to be in there a lot. This is actually a picture of the Large Hadron Collider. It's 17 miles in circumference. It goes underneath France and Switzerland. It's the most complex machine humanity has ever made. It freezes magnets down to almost absolute zero, and oscillates the particle beams just under the speed of light in opposite directions, and it takes, I don't know, it's multiple thousand times a second that they go around, and then they the beams are going separate and then they cross them. And the collisions is what we get our understanding of what's inside the particle from. And this is the highest speed particle collision in May of 2010 when they ramped up the energy behind it. And it's a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which you see a lot with the fastest speeds of things. This, ramping it up to that level, is what allows them to find the Higgs field, which happens July 4th, 2012, exact Uranus square Pluto with the sun again, and really opposite Saturn, which fits finding the last particle, but also the particle that allows everything else to gain mass. That's what the Higgs field is. It's actually, from what I described, it's a field of energy, not a particular boson, that allows all the other particles inside the atom, when it interacts with it, to gain mass. So, I want to go back to the first quote. The notion that reality is a set of fields for giving probability to finding their associated quanta. Just skip to the bottom. Not only did the idea of matter disappear into the field concept, but the field specified the probability of finding quanta. And this is where I think what Rick has done with Cosmos and Psyche is the first real evidence of finding quanta of phenomenal experience in history that align with these archetypal probability waves. Cosmos and Psyche demonstrates how when the alignments are within certain orbs, you're more likely to find phenomena that correlate to those archetypes. So that's where I'm kind of intuiting that they're archetypal fields of probability, and it's how we participate in them as to how the archetypes are enacted. And here's, I guess I'll just go ahead and, this is kind of like where I've come to in my understanding and what I'm suggesting may also be happening. Quantum mechanics renders a description of reality that transcends our understanding of the subject-object division. Because the act of observing phenomena influences the observed, there is no objective reality that is predetermined. This principle understanding allows for not only human free will, but novelty itself to exist. Reality is both particle and wave until we collapse the wave into an actual event through our participation. And as well, the archetypal astrological discipline also renders an underlying unity and participation between the planetary archetypes and the intimate depths of the human psyche. Our current understanding of the subjective self, separate from objective world, seems to be an epistemological error with incredibly profound ontological consequences. Now, I don't want to say that it's only an error. I think there are tremendous gifts from the subject-object division, which the main one is our autonomy and our sense of self-reflection, our capacity for personal self-reflection. So it's not just an error in that sense, but it may be a perception of reality that we need to transcend, in a sense of recognizing that it's not as absolute as we have perceived it to be, and that there is evidence that seems to describe a participation in any unity that lies underneath both psychology and physics are of matter. Does that make some kind of sense? Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really, if you guys have any questions, yes, Sean.
Great chat. Thank you so much. Hopefully just a little question. In the first slide you had,
With the graph, or?
yeah, with the Uranus-Pluto alignments,
Yeah.
there's not much, like, why is there nothing going on between the late 30s and the 60s, and then not much going, like nothing indicated in that chart
Right.
between the 60s and...
Right. If I probably should have done the Jupiter-Uranus in a different graph, but it's so, there's so many, it becomes a little jumbled to look at.
So
I
you've
probably-
selected.
He left out the sextiles.
I did leave out
If you
the
had the two sextiles on each side of the 60s conjunction, it would look regular.
But still, they're grouped much closer together on the left than on the right. So there's some sort of selection
That's
going
the
on.
trine.
He's got the trine.
This is the trine here.
And then the conjunction is after there's a sextile gap, and then there's another sextile gap.
Here, right?
Right there when
Yeah.
Uranus-Neptune conjunction, many
Right.
people here were born with,
Right.
and Uranus is
Okay.
sextile.
Yeah,
Great,
and so,
thank you.
please.
No, that's great. That was just a quick question. But another quick question. We can talk about it later if you want. Have you looked at Bohm, his
Yes.
chart and so on?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear
Sure.
more about how he fits into that.
Yeah.
And,
Let's see. I can pull it up real quick.
because I noticed in your concluding statement too, you say that the quantum realm is both particle and wave.
Correct.
Which I like, because that's Bohm's view. It's not the standard view that it's nothing. It's just a field of probability until we observe it, which I personally think is incoherent, and Bohm has a different reading of that. So it sounds like you're maybe going in that direction, but I don't know.
Well, wait, going in what direction? Okay, yeah. So yeah, Bohm has Uranus opposite Saturn and Neptune. So Saturn would be the explicate order, Neptune is the implicate order.
Yeah, let's say one Greek thing, Saturn, Neptune.
Yeah.
Like Bohm followed de Broglie, and he said there really are particles, but the particles, Saturn, are always accompanied by a wave, a pilot wave, Neptune.
Right.
So Bohm is working with the not separating particle and wave at the level of the quantum. That's
Okay.
reflected in the
Gotcha.
chart.
So, yeah, I did look at it. It just didn't fit into the Uranus-Pluto, Jupiter-Uranus. And he wasn't listed as one of the 10 founders of quantum mechanics. So I just started with the founders and was so struck by how much. And honestly, I left a bunch out. Otto Hahn.
did a marathon.
I know. I had to. I mean, I had 70 slides. I had to pull out a bunch of actual evidence that's more supportive. But anyway, Lydia?
I think that I'm just so impressed by the way that, because I think it's so common in conversation now to hear like, well, quantum mechanics explains this and quantum mechanics explains the magic of the cosmos. But the way that you are articulating the connection between the potential of how archetypes manifest, the reality of archetypal reality in connection with what this information is showing us feels so invaluable to me, and it's helping me understand and feel like I can step into even more that, just understanding that way of being. And I can't help but notice a very strong connection between what you just presented on and what Laura presented on with divine ecology, like ecological divination, and just thinking about the way the diviner, or the participation, or where we're observing from, just the way that we participate with the manifestation of reality, and that it's not so simple, but maybe we will actually get to a place, or maybe we already have, where we can understand what human participation can look like in the realm of the nonlinear, or
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Lydia. And I think quantum mechanics was founded in 1900, but it wasn't solidified as a science until 1927. And Cosmos and Psyche was published in 2005, and it's the first salvo of this new method of a new discipline of measuring archetypal phenomena. And how statistics can play a role in this, I don't know. But all I know is that there are way too many correlations specifically related to the archetypes of those planets and those people for it to be chance. It's so far beyond what chance in my mind could render that there is absolutely meaning there, deep meaning. And in the sense that it's just an emerging discipline, we're on the early thresholds of understanding it. of moving into a new relationship to how we are participating with the archetypes. Like, none of this is possible until the discovery of Pluto. We have to go through the Copernican revolution and find the outer planets at the same time that we forge the individual autonomous being through the American and French revolutions. And we develop personal depth psychology that now can be reflected in the planetary alignments that we literally didn't have access to fully until 1930. So this is an emerging discipline, and it's up to all of us to do more research and provide, recognize more evidence. I mean, I just did this with quantum mechanics, and it fits so well because there's so many conceptual overlaps. I mean, like I was saying, like it's because it's both particle and wave, and neither before we participate in it, that allows for our free will and for new things to happen in the universe. If Einstein had been right, it would have been predetermined and there would be no novelty. Reality would have an objective place, and we would only just be seeing what was already there. But the way quantum mechanics describes the universe is that it's at its core participatory, and we are co-creating our future in correspondence to the archetypes that we're both born with and that we embody in the times of our lives and during our transits. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Thanks, Chaz. So interesting. I'm really curious, and it's related to what you were just saying about there's no predetermined reality until the observer participates. And I noticed you had that sentence on your final slide. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what the role of the non-human observers is, or do you believe that non-humans are observing, or could you expound on that a little bit?
Absolutely. You mean non-human, just ecology, animal life and stuff? Or
yeah,
just,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Any non-humans.
Absolutely. No, I think, personally, I think the archetypes are at the core of all phenomena. And it ultimately, I believe it is a neutral language that Jung and Pauli were seeking to describe or inform both psychology and physics. But when I mean physics, it's matter. It's the material world that, by its uncertainty and unpredictability, is alive, responding. Like the electron goes through it like it knew it was being seen. Matter itself is most likely very sacred, and God may be within every atom. Looking out, and on some level we're inside an atom looking out at probability waves of the archetypal alignments that we're participating in on some level. There's a fractal, it's fractal up all the way down, it seems. Yeah. Any other questions? Tom?
Yeah, I was just thinking that Jupiter-Uranus, more than any other aspect, is the aspect of the move from disenchantment into enchantment, from BPM 3 to 4. And that the founders of quantum mechanics, from what you're saying, were completely unconsciously, at least putting down the foundations from which physics could begin to overcome the object, if you like, and to begin to participate in a installed cosmos. Yeah, exactly. Overcoming the sense that there is an objective universe that's separate from us. That seems to be the key insight, that it's not that. It's co-created by our participation, probably at all levels.
I know we got to break for lunch, but I just have to caution that there's nothing about the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, for example, that coincides with the beginning of quantum mechanics, or then the Solvay Congress and so forth. Yes, those are, and we see that in perinatal breakthroughs. That's the most characteristic transit, which we're all going to get in the next, 14 months. The Jupiter-Uranus opposition for potential creative breakthroughs of all kinds. But there's not it's not wedded to a particular worldview. So even though that the Jupiter-Uranus that Chad has just focused on within the context of quantum mechanics fits exactly what you said. But the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is exactly what Descartes had when he published the Discourse on Method in 1637. And he himself was born with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction right on his sun. He totally carrying it in a quadruple conjunction with Pluto. So that's why he's so kind of epic of a figure. So what I'm trying to say is that every paradigm breakthrough, successful breakthrough, it could be going in the materialistic direction, or it could be going into a participatory re-enchantment direction. There's not like the archetypes are really multivalent wave patterns that can be inflected in a lot of different ways. So I just don't want us to think that it's just the archetypes are all just on the side of, our particular emerging paradigm. It's been doing this for a long time, carrying us on a lot of potential journeys, including ones that can go into some fairly problematic directions.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, and I didn't mean to say otherwise.
No, I
Thank you.
Thank you very much.